When I served as the principal of a supplementary school some years back, I recall a staff meeting that got a little out of hand. People were in a crazy mood and kind of teasing one another throughout the meeting. And after the meeting, I spoke to my supervisor at the time, Rabbi Davis, and he and I reflected on people's sense of humor. And he said, I wish people would prefer to be kind rather than clever. Truthfully, I didn't think too much about it at the time when he said it in that moment. His message resonated with me a few weeks later when I had some time to digest it, and I still often think about it today. Be kind, not clever. Now, as someone who loves humor, I know, shocking, Rabbi Davis's words just kept ringing in my ear, and I started realizing that very often people make jokes at other people's expense to be funny. And as if a switch went off in my head, I became completely averse to teasing, joking, let alone bullying of any kind, or making fun of someone else at their expense. Furthermore, I became more aware of people speaking ill of themselves, even in jest. I realized it was a cheap shot to make fun of someone or at ourselves in order to make others laugh. Anyone who is actually funny can be creative enough in making people laugh without putting them down. And I recognize that my view might seem a bit extreme, but in my eyes, if we can't find ways to make each other laugh without a darkness hovering above us, maybe we need to rethink our strategy in using humor. Several months ago, New York Times columnist Jason Zinnemann wrote a piece entitled, "Is It Funny for the Jews?" And in it, I find that he asks a really fundamental cultural question. If a sense of humor is integral to Jewish identity, is it appropriate to have the Jew at the center of self-deprecating jokes? And to put it another way, perhaps more directly, as anti-Semitism is on the rise and hate crimes against Jews resurging, is it still funny for us to be our own punching bags? You've all heard the jokes. Many of them deal with Jews being cheap, having big noses, being neurotic, and playing into other stereotypes that exist in our culture. Zinnemann gives an example of such a stereotype. He described the musical Caroline or Change, where an 8-year-old Jewish boy, Noah, and his African-American maid, Caroline, live in the time of Jim Crow South and get into a heated fight that ends in really ugly insults. Noah, the 8-year-old boy, says that he hopes a bomb kills all black people, and Caroline responds that all the Jews will go to hell. Sharon D. Clark, who plays the character Caroline, the African-American maid, explains that she finds something very unsettling at the end of this argument. People laugh after her line of sending all the Jews to hell. She finds it jarring, and then she realized later on that the people who were laughing were probably Jews. There's a long, rich Jewish tradition of grappling with anti-Semitism by laughing at it. There have been countless shows and films contributed by people like Mel Brooks, who depicts Nazis as dancing and singing goofs, all the way to Sacha Baron Cohen as Borat, bringing light the anti-Semitism in our very own country. And some of these comedians argue that by making light of hatred removes the power away from those people who are trying to create harm in our world. Having a resilient sense of humor allows Jews to do what they've done for centuries, which is find joy in the harshest moments in history. But the question still remains, where do we draw this line? Comedian Sarah Silverman adds another observation about the movie industry. She says, the pattern in film is just undeniable. And the pattern is, if the Jewish woman character is courageous or deserves love, she's never played by a Jew. Acting requires an empathetic leap of imagination. And when a person of a different faith plays the role of a Jewish person, the results of the acting are frequently more comfortable and successful for our viewers. And if Silverman's reflection is true, it makes us wonder, why does this happen? Why isn't the Jew worth loving? Why can't Jewish actors portraying Jewish actors be at the center of the film as the main protagonist? In his book, Jews Don't Count, the British comic David Baddiel argues that casting for movies and shows is one of the many issues we have in our culture that shows how anti-Semitism is far more acceptable than other forms of bigotry. Part of the reason Baddiel explains is that people who are anti-Semitic see Jewish people in two different ways at the exact same time. The first is this low status or low class. This is lingering racism from many previous generations. And high status, who run the banks, control Hollywood, etc. And these ideas are all based on old stereotypes or misinterpretations that linger through time. So what does this mean for us? I recognize that some of this is hard to hear, and I really want us to think about it together. Not just this evening, but in the coming years as we continue to journey into the future and create a more tolerant society together. Comedy is an integral lens to observe from the outside, though it also seems very close at the same time. The most successful television shows and films are those where we can identify ourselves with one or more of the main characters. And as Jews, there's always a special connection to the Jewish characters we watch on television. We have that automatic commonality. But is the way the character portrayed on television automatically mean that's who we are? What messages do we send to the rest of the world when we only see stereotypes of Jews on TV? Now, we can say that it's just a movie, it's just a show, but what happens off the screen? Are we still seen in the same light? I'd also like to add a sidebar here. The Jews that we see on American television are often Ashkenazi American or stereotypical rough-around-the-edge Israelis. What about the Mizrahi Jews, the Jews of Middle Eastern descent, or Black Jews? We are far from being a one type of religion. We come in all shapes, sizes, and colors, and we do not often see the diversity of Jews on television. Tonight, I'm using television as a relatable way to talk about the real issue at hand. How do we, as individuals, and a collective culture, faith and religion, represent ourselves to each other and the world? Kol Nidre is about independent and shared reflection, and I'd like for us to think about who we are and what role we play in the Jewish narrative. This sermon was actually inspired by all of you. A few months back, I sat with some of you after the incident at Mentor Lake High School, where an athlete, who you would hope would have good sports integrity, had a swastika on their leg. I had several different conversations with our beloved teens, and I began to hear a recurring pattern that did not sit well with me. Some of you even named it, a sort of neutrality or numbness to not only this incident, but an overall lack of sensation when hearing of other tragedies as well, like school shootings. Moreover, you weren't as stunned as I thought you'd be to this kind of bigotry, as it's really not an isolated incident. As we ponder our most meaningful religious and cultural Jewish experiences this Kol Nidre, I want us to actively find creative ways of bringing our faith into the world as an authentic practice that is not based on stereotypes, but a practice that is centered around values, integrity, joy, and peace. And this way we can both stand true behind our words with our practices while also sharing our Jewish truths with those around us, one person at a time. For example, Some years back, I met someone briefly, and in the short time he and I spoke, he told me that he'd always wished he had a bigger family to celebrate Christmas and Easter with them. I understood his desire, as I have a pretty big family and have the most wonderful celebrations with them, even though they all live far away. I told him about my favorite time of the year, Passover, because we have such a vivacious Seder. He was somewhat taken aback, perplexed. I thought he was confused when I said vivacious Seder. But actually, he said, Seder, what is that? I responded, oh, that's a Jewish holiday that marks the end of the Israelite slavery in Egypt. You're Jewish? Yes, I replied. I've never met a Jewish person before. We had a long conversation. He kept saying that I was not at all how he imagined a Jewish person looks or acts like. He had seen Jews on TV before, but didn't realize there were Jews all over the world. We went on, and I actually ended up inviting him to one of my Passover Seders. And after a few years of joining us for Seder, he later admitted to me that he was shocked when he first met, because it contradicted all of his preconceived notions about Jews. He apologized quite a bit, and I told him that now he can speak from his own experience about Jewish culture and Jewish people. He was just one person, but I know he spoke to his friends at his church, and I ended up teaching a few classes there later on. We created a friendship and connection based on tolerance, learning, and having authentic conversations about who we really are. This is just one example of what we can all do. On this Yom Kippur, I invite all of us to be kind, not clever, about our own faith, as well as to all of those around us. Rather than joking about stereotypes or poking fun, let us collectively agree to find inspiring and thoughtful ways to bridge gaps between people through understanding and compassion. Let us be curious about other people's traditions and faith and find common places where we can elevate our values and sense of integrity together. Judaism has this incredible quality of being a faith, a culture, a language, a way of life, a nationality, and so much more. There are millions of ways of being Jewish and doing Judaism. Let us come together on this Yom Kippur and continue the much-needed work on tolerance of all people by first accepting ourselves with open arms. In that way, we can also make unique and deliberate connections with others. I wish us all the ability and courage to push away a desire to be clever and sometimes harmful, and rise up and be strengthened by our ability to be kind to all. I wish you all an easy fast, a Gemar Chatima Tova, peace and kindness.